Richard, thank you so much for agreeing to come on my series entitled Asking the Hard Questions, What Legacy Are We Leaving Our Young? And as family psychotherapist, director of the Therapy Institute, a former educationist, columnist with the Irish Examiner, and author of Parenting the Screenager, I think you're ideally placed to throw some light on the challenges and opportunities offered by technology for our young, the generations of leaders and whatever of tomorrow. So technology is here to stay. Perhaps its safe and productive use is one of our greatest challenges. What do you reckon?
I think, it's very important that we don't technology bash. It is here to stay. And it's very easy to sensationalize the impact technology is having on teenagers' lives. But the fact is, Teresa, technology is allowing us to live longer. It's helping us to go into the universe and get more ideas about who we are and where we came from. Over the course of this last 14 difficult months, it connected us. It's the reason we have a vaccine. It's the reason we're going to defeat the virus. So technology is a very important part of where we are now, but also where we're going as a species. So it's not about bashing it, but it's exactly what you said there. I suppose the conundrum or the rub of it, as Hamlet would say, is what is it that how are we going to parent this? How are we going to allow our children to live with it and live without it at the same time? And that is the important question, I think. And in the book, I'm very clear about not technology bashing, because I do think it's out there at the moment. It's in the ether. Teenagers are so, consumed with technology. Teenagers, they have no friends. They spend their time upstairs avoiding vitamin D, and there's so much stuff out there in the media. And I suppose it's important to understand that there's a kind of a paradox with technology. Yes, they might be up in their games, but they're also connecting to their friends. So it's again, when I was a kid in the 80s, I remember watching these ads and not really understanding them, and it was saying about you can't outsource your parenting to like TV, and you can't now outsource your parenting to technology, which is happening, I think, with parents. So it's about having a real sensible balance and a sensible policy that allows your child to access technology, but also allows them to be a part of the family. Because honestly, if you're going to take technology from your children, you're denying them, a really important part of their social and developmental stage at this point in this world that they live in.
You're disempowering them, really.
You are, exactly.
Yeah.
You are.
I love the title.
Thank you.
Love the title. It just grabbed me, and it gets it all. And having read your book, you do certainly find the balance. You find that balance. Bad cop, good cop is going on the whole time in your book.
Exactly.
It's very, very good. But I suppose the reason people have become more alert now is how we have been catapulted into the world of technology, whether we liked it or not, due to the COVID-19 experience. And the pivot that educators themselves had to make on the hoof just to keep things going was amazing.
It was incredible. But out of all discomfort, Teresa, comes opportunity, and out of disruption comes change. And we're not good at doing change, but disruption forces you to change. And we've been forced to change. And I think that's probably the silver lining out of this thing, is that it's catapulted us about 100 years into the future, where now we're thinking about the way we do the work and how we do the work that we do, where we're thinking maybe a blended approach, which wouldn't have, this 15 months ago, we would never have thought about, being online and being able to go into the office. And so, it has really changed how we access education, how we think about the classes that we teach, how we think about the work that we do.
And I was speaking with another person on this series who pointed out to me the beauty of being able to sit at home and maybe take a Harvard course, take a course from any of the great universities across the world without having to travel. And even connecting with somebody in India, somebody in Saudi, somebody in Los Angeles on this series has been brilliant. I would never have been able to do it without the benefits of technology. But your work is broad-ranging, and it plays to your many strengths and your experiences, obviously. And that's what makes your book so attractive, because you sit it right in real experience. And you talk about boundary setting, communication building, and then you hit on the dark side of technology inappropriately used, like gaming, pornography, bullying, and cyberbullying. Okay, what must parents know and do to ameliorate the situation for their children, to protect their children, or wise them up on time?
It's a very good question, Teresa. It's a very good question. And for my book, I've been working with teenagers in many capacities in different parts of the work that I do, and for nearly 20 years. And I noticed in the last, say, 6 years, there was a huge shift in what teenagers were presenting with, the issues that they were coming into my clinic with. And when I was preparing to write this book, I went around to about 25 schools in Ireland, and I carried out a bit of data. I interviewed, every year in the school, and then I talked to the parents afterwards, and I'd give them advice and feedback on what I heard in the interviews in the classes that I was having with the students. And one of the first things, how I'd start off all of my interviews and my my talks with the students, I'd say to them, "What piece of information don't you want me to give to your parents about gaming?" And they'd say, "Please, Richard, don't tell them to take the games out of the room." Right. And I'd say, "Oh, that's very good." And every class pretty much said the same. And when I started the talk with the parents, I'd say to them, "Now, I'm just giving you a bit of feedback. Your children have begged me not to tell you, take the games out of the rooms. So now what you do is you take the games out of the room." And I'd say that's a really important part of managing gaming, because when they're up in their bedroom, they're unable to manage themselves. Some students, of course, some kids will be able to manage themselves. The majority of them won't, because when they take a device into their hand, Teresa, when they've got a multiplayer, multifaceted game like Fortnite or whatever it is, it's so powerful, they won't be able to manage and regulate their own activity on it.
They're sucked in.
Well, they're so immersive, you see.
Sure.
And then this is where I would see my work as a family psychotherapist. If you put a rupture in peer group there, or you put a rupture in the family, or a family that's separating, or a kid who's having a difficulty in school, or the game is just the perfect device, conduit for them to escape reality and go into it, because it's designed to be immersive. And the World Health Organization in 2018 classified it as a new mental health condition. And so the DSM-5, the recent DSM Diagnostic Statistics Manual, has it pending. And this is where I get scared. And this is what really prompted me to write this book, is where I see this going. The logical conclusion of all this is that the DSM-6 will have it as a mental health condition. And then you'll have a rollout of a pharmacological response to gaming. And then you'll have kids being medicated because of the gaming habit, whereas it's a parental issue.
Considering, when you consider that 18-month-olds, 2-year-olds in some parts of the States are on Ritalin.
Of course.
If you project your thoughts forward in a parallel,
it's a dystopian trajectory, to think about medicating your kids along this, when all it takes is actually bringing in a sensible policy and bringing in boundaries. As in my book, you can see I go through all the different types of boundaries, and the one that to me stands out as a boundary that allows your child to be a part of the family and separate from it, that they feel a part of the boundaries, that they're helping you write the boundaries, that everybody's got the buy-in for it. Of course, kids will always test your boundaries, but the boundaries must always hold. I mean, they're not going to be too rigid. If a kid hits a boundary and it just stays like this, it's too much for them. A boundary must move slightly and come back into place. And so when your kid is 4, 5, 6, 7, that's when you really get the boundaries written so they understand how to follow them. So when they're a teenager, I meet teenagers 15, 16, generally about 15, and the parents are going, "We cannot manage this kid."
Sure.
And I'm looking and saying, "Well, how have you managed him coming through?" And they're like, "Well, he never had any consequences. There was no ramifications for his behavior." And now you got a 15-year-old, and it's like that line in The Sopranos. I was watching The Sopranos recently, and Tony Soprano says to his wife, who's a mafia boss, about his daughter, "If she figures out we've no power, we're finished here." Right?
I know.
And that's the thing.
We get training for so many aspects of our lives. There's no requirement for any training for parenting.
No, there's not. And it's a constantly evolving landscape.
Absolutely. But that blurring of parameters between the duties and responsibilities of parenting and the duties and responsibilities of the educator. And that's a real conundrum for educators now. How do we manage that? How do we realign that a conundrum, that it has gone out of all order at this stage? Some teachers would say to you, education seems to be at the bottom of my list. I spend my time doing A, B, C, and D. That formerly the children came in equipped with a certain know-how, but they don't seem to anymore.
And I think, I suppose, the expectations of the teacher has changed massively. And I suppose what COVID has really shown us is how important schools are. They can be for children who are experiencing dysfunctionality in their home. They can be a refuge, and I think that's what we've seen an awful lot. The research there and the studies that I've been reading. I lecture trainee teachers in DCU, and I suppose from my own point of view, this is what I'm actually carrying out a piece of research. I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship for it to go to America and carry this out. I'm heading over there this summer, hopefully, COVID permitting, to Seattle. And it's about really it's about the teacher, it's about the joint systems of the family and the teacher, and how when they align, it's an incredibly powerful thing. But when they align in a very negative way against the child, it's also a very destructive thing. So I do think
middle ground, finding the middle ground.
I think with teacher, I suppose there's a lot more than just the curriculum you teach. And I think if you're going to be a highly effective teacher in the modern classroom, you have to be able to bring yourself into the classroom, and you have to think about the ecologies and the context of the students that you're teaching. Sure. I think the old, archaic way of viewing the teacher as, the progenitor of all knowledge, and the student sits there passively accepting this information, and that's gone. And I think we learn, we learn in a collaborative way. And I think when the teacher understands that they're learning too in the process, and this is a reciprocal process, I think really magical stuff can happen in the classroom.
Do you think the education system as we present it now, or as we interpret it now, is fit for purpose? Are we at a real crossroads where we need to rethink things?
I think we are, Teresa. In my evaluation and my analysis, and I read a lot about it, and I write about it a lot. I'm thinking in an Irish context. I wonder, are we setting our kids up for the world that's out there now? I wonder how we educate them. Is that fit for purpose? And forcing them to study subjects that they have no interest in. This is what I see a lot, and I work in schools as well. And I see them struggling to learn a subject that they mightn't have any interest in, and then they know they're never going to apply this subject again once they leave school. And I really question: Are we setting them up? Yeah, setting them up to really be prepared for the world that's out there. I think we need to maybe adopt more of a Scandinavian model where we look at problems utilizing subjects rather than looking at learning subjects and rote learning and learning it off verbatim and then just pressing the delete button the minute the exam is over. So I think there might be an overhaul of how I definitely think there's going to be an overhaul of how we assess our students. Yes. I think that's changing massively, but I think there really needs to be a sitting down with experts in this field and thinking, well, this is something that's been going on for hundreds of years. Is this fit for the modern world? Do we need to think about how our students get prepared for the work that they're going to go into? And what I see as well, Teresa, I talk to students about it as well. I don't think we set them up for, something that's really enriched my life has been like a polymath, been really interested into many different diverse areas, working in schools, working in universities, working in my clinic, writing books, playing the guitar, being really interested in poetry, reading a lot, all the diversity that makes your life rich. We never tell students about any of that stuff. We tell them you can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor, you can be a plumber, you can be...
We pigeonhole them to where...
We pigeonhole them. And I wrote an article about it this Thursday in the Examiner about the day, how we destroy because our children, when they come into school, are wired for so much. And it's almost like we short circuit the wiring by making their world so linear. We become reductionist in their, by the way we interact with them. And they all of a sudden they see, well, I can only be this. And that's ridiculous because we can be so many things.
And come to the early exposure by two children of a technology.
Yeah.
Are we, in a sense, at the early stage when the wiring of the brain is going on, and when that real spontaneity and creativity in the child, if the child is allowed free access to technology during that time, is there somewhat of a robbery of that organic creativity going on?
Well, the research is out on that, right? I've read a lot about that. The research is out about whether that actually, disconnects neurons from connecting and all the rest of it, and does that stop them from firing and wiring together? The research is kind of out in that one, and there's some research would say that it increases memory and it develops the ability to connect, and so the research is out there. But I don't think a child should ever have unlimited access to technology, because once they take this into their hand, right? Once they have that in their hand, they have the whole world at their fingertips. And from my perspective, what I've seen in recent times is, an accessing of extreme hardcore pornographic material, which is a very dangerous situation to get our children into at such a young age.
Once that is destroyed in the child, I would think that it's next to impossible to roll back.
Well, it's very difficult once intimacy becomes disturbed with a kind of a pathological view of it, or a kind of a fantasy view of it. It's very hard to get true intimacy back again. And I see with 8, 9, 10-year-olds coming into my clinic who have been, caught in school with on their lunch break with, accessing really awful stuff on their phones. But also I see it couple therapy, where couples come in and they're just newly married, and there's huge problems in the marriage because one partner, generally the husband, finds it really difficult to be intimate, and out of the conversations comes his addiction, let's say, to pornography. And so we have to protect our children, and I just think it's incredible. And I spoke to the Taoiseach here in Ireland, the Prime Minister, about this before Christmas, saying that, I spoke to him and I said, how can we let our children just roam this stuff freely? Surely there has to be an onus put back on these these service providers who, if it's something as simple as putting your email in for a kid, they wouldn't do it because they think they're being tracked. So they would know something very simple that would make them feel like they're being watched in their activity would perhaps stop them from accessing, extreme material. And we've got so many cases here. The Anna Kriegel case, where she was murdered by, classmates, and they found in boy A's phone, extreme material and bestiality and all this stuff that you would, like when I was a kid, you wouldn't even have heard of.
So the children have become desensitized in ways.
I think, well, it's so the accessibility is just, it's like having alcohol everywhere. You can just go drink it. Of course, kids are going to go drink it. So you have to put a law in place. You have to have a policy in place as a country to say, well, you can't access this.
Would we seem very slow on that? Now, one of my past conversations with Professor Tom Butler of UCC. You may be aware, you may know him. He was principal investigator of Ireland's Governance, Risk and Compliance Technology Centre. And he has written a research paper entitled A Critical Review of Digital Technology in Education that should give policymakers and educators pause for thought. I can send it on to you. It is very alarming. And he cites the multiple downsides of exposure by our young to digital technology: sleep disruption, computer vision syndrome, inability to concentrate, to deep learn, to recall, all of these things. And the actual physical downside of being in a Wi-Fi beaded atmosphere when the skull is not yet fully hardened and formed, and even the downside for female teachers who may be expecting babies. And all of this, there are thousands of research papers on all of this, but it would appear that the multi-trillion industry wins out as opposed to heightening awareness and doing something about it. Now, so the emphasis on ramping up our digital technology in education without any concrete evidence that it is positively impacting outcomes for students. That is out there, but it's not hitting home. I was alarmed in phoning the Department of Education and in trying to establish with the Health and Safety Authority if there were any guidelines for, they talk about safe use of technology, but I'm talking about the physical safety, and there are no guidelines.
Well, there's not, no. And I think an area that I would see hugely, and I definitely agree, Professor Brown, there, that sleep disruption is one of the most, it's probably in recent times, when you think of school refusal, it's probably the biggest reason students don't go to school now. Before would have been a rupture in the peer group, but now it's because they're actually just exhausted. They've been up all night gaming. Your phone emits a blue screen, which impacts melatonin production, which, disrupts your circadian clock. It really interrupts your sleeping pattern. And so these games are designed to keep you active. And something like, say, Fortnite, which is a kind of a 20-minute game, it's designed so you go one more. It impacts regions of the brain. These multiplayer games impact. The research is clear. I mean, this isn't someone suggesting this. This is actually, the research is clear by the American Psychiatric Association that it impacts your pathways in your brain that's the centers of reward and pleasure. So it is addictive, right? So it makes you feel better.
Is there a need for a connection to be done between the various, those who are pushing it and the authorities who should rein it in?
Well,
Is
those who are
it?
pushing it are interested in money. I mean, the guys who made Fortnite made something like 4 billion in two and a half, 3 years on a free game. So the Beatles didn't make 4 billion in 40, 50 years of being the biggest selling band of all time. So there's huge money, Teresa. You're talking about huge money. So it's like, how do you? I suppose when I was talking to the on Taoiseach and I was asking about it, he was saying, well, it's such a rapidly changing landscape. It's a very difficult thing to we have to push the pressure back on them. But I was suggesting to him, well, they're not going to do anything because there's so much money to be made. So
Well,
we have to policy it.
in speaking or in reading Mary Aiken's work, she found it very, very difficult to get through the layers of power
Well, there's money involved.
in relation to the age for access, to the internet, etc. And she found it incredible. I mean, she was working out of UCD, but was no longer supported, so has gone abroad, which augurs badly, really, for where we're at in terms of our maturity at governance level. Yeah?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. Yeah.
So what impact has it on the development then of communication and real solid communication?
Yeah, well, I think nothing has disrupted impacted communication quite like technology. I think we welcomed the iPhone, whatever it was when it came out in 2007, iPhone 3, I think it was called, like a Trojan horse into our lives. And, you don't have to be an expert in this stuff to see the disruption that's come into communication. You just have to sit in a restaurant, you have to sit in a train, you have to, just walk around. Everybody is tuned out of life and plugged into their device. And it is massively interrupted to communication with teenagers, I think, because everything is instantaneous now. Everything is abbreviated. Everything is functional. So true communication, because we're mammals, Teresa, we love to be connected. And this is where I see the disruption. So our brain fires when we're talking to a friend and we're meeting someone that we get on with and we're like-minded and we're like kindred spirits. Our brain is hardwired for that stuff to fire. And those pathways open up and we feel really connected and we feel heard and we feel like we're communicating. That's a really healthy part of our well-being and sense of self. All of that has been impacted by technology because, all you have to do is sit in a train. You'd see 3, 4, I do it every day, and I see schoolgirls sitting down chatting to each other through the device, and they're showing each other images from, say, Snapchat, and they're talking, they're laughing, but they're not talking to each other. They're talking through the device. So it has massively impacted, but their communication. But also, you sit in a restaurant, you'll see couples sitting down and they're on their devices. You sit at home, and you'll see couples coming in to me telling me that they sit at home, but they're not together. They're there physically, but they're divided by their device. And so we have to. They're very powerful things. They're very hard to manage. I know myself. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I find it hard myself. When I come home, my wife would say to me, like, it's 8 o'clock. That's it. Now I run a clinic, so I have to be on my device and emails coming in. But by 8 o'clock, I'd say to myself, that's it, and I turn it off and I put it away. And I have to put it away, and it's not the first thing I check in the morning. And my impulse is to check it in the morning, and I make sure that it's not in my room, so I can't check it, right? So you don't want the first thing you do is to roll over the bed and go on your device.
Which brings us to the whole thing of sleep hygiene. So what would you advise parents to do in relation to keeping the bedroom healthy?
I'd say over the last 14 years, parents watching this would be very concerned about their child's sleep patterns, because the minute school was over, all rules were gone. Students were staying up all night and they were on their devices, and of course they were communicating with their friends because they had to socially distance, but it was massively impacting their healthy sleep pattern. And I talked to so many parents over the last number of months who were really concerned about how will they get back into the pattern of school, the normative sleeping pattern. I say, well, you need to keep it. You can't allow it to be eroded completely. Obviously it moves slightly, but it doesn't, they cannot be allowed to be up all night. And I'd say the first thing is with sleep hygiene, it's really about getting a habit, a good pattern. It's really about, like, your room being a really kind of a space that's not cluttered, a calm space where it's not your work. Your bedroom isn't where you work. Your bedroom is a space where you come in to read and go to sleep. Good health hygiene is about how you are during the day, eating healthily, exercising, getting out, getting vitamin D, getting the dopamine firing and all that kind of stuff. But also as you come to like, say, 7 or 8 o'clock, you're not on your devices all the time. It's going to be really hard to go to sleep when you're on your device or you're gaming. So I wouldn't let my child game past like 8 o'clock.
Wow. I read an article recently on Generation Z, and it's amazing. It was based in the United States. 95% of them have the latest in the iPhone. 50% of them spend more than 10 hours a day online.
Oh yeah.
Yet, when asked what was the most important thing to them, what do they hold dearest, they said communication, having a solid, predictable work stream, and being able to save money, which was different. They ran a comparison with the baby boomers, and baby boomers were all into the experience. Generation Z seemed to have copped, I must secure my future.
Mm.
They were into saving. I found there were a lot of threads going through that report.
But sure, I mean, just look at the world that they came out of. They came out of the economic downturn and then into a pandemic. Of course, you can understand why they feel uncertain about the future and why they're thinking about, providing for themselves. But I just think, again, with all of this, it's really important, because I have a charity myself called Embrace Philippines, where I bring teenagers over to the Philippines and we work with the Badjao tribe in Davao. It's an incredible experience, and it's all through education. We're building a school at the moment. And one of the big parts of this is that I say to them when they come over, there's no technology here now for 2 weeks. You can go on your phone at the end of the night to WhatsApp to tell your parents you're fine, but there's no Snapchat, there's none of your social media, there's no, Instagram or Twitter or anything. There's nothing like that, and you have to hand up your phone to me and it's gone. And at the start they're like, oh God, they find it very difficult for the first 2 nights. And at the end, when I'm doing my orientation at the end, and I say, well, how did you find? The one thing that I've never had a student say to me, I hated not having my phone. What they actually said to me was, it was refreshing. We were playing the guitar, we were playing cards, we were chatting, we were doing all old things that I would have heard before, what teenagers do. And it was just so refreshing. And it made them reflect on themselves, and it made them journal a little bit more. And, so it's such an important thing that we help our children to manage their usage of technology, because it's here to stay, Teresa. So we have to, as parents, not give up our authority or parental authority. We must take that parental authority and not be dictatorial about it, but just put into place a nice boundary that again allows them to have their technology, but 10 hours a day is, that's neglect, I think, to be honest. I mean, that's just, you're not living up to your parental duties there.
There are many forms of neglect that are going under, not addressed, really, yes, when you think of the world of technology. So when our digital natives themselves become teachers, that's when the corner is turned, real impacts. What do you envisage then? Would you hope that they would have been trained in respect for technology and that they would then pass it on? I would note with a lot of younger teachers that the interactive whiteboard is used a lot. And it nearly has become a crutch or a substitute teacher for some. What do you think of that?
I find it fascinating teaching trainee teachers, and to see because they're coming out of the digital age, right? I'm a digital immigrant. They're digital natives, right? So they're coming out of this digital age. I love seeing their classroom. I love seeing their class preparation, because they don't think about photocopying a handout and giving it to the student. They think about, how can they bring the world into the classroom? They think in a different way. They think about utilizing technology in a way that's fascinating. And this is where these kids are coming from. This is the world that they exist in now. So, handing them a black and white piece of paper can really be difficult for them to sit there and manage. So I just think to find the blended approach that these new teachers come up with, I find it fascinating. I think it's the way technology has to go.
Maybe that's where the pivot is going to lie. That's where
it is. I think that's where it is. That's where it's going. And I think the Department of Education, anyone in the Department of Education is probably over 50, and so they probably haven't got the greatest finger on the pulse for how students want to learn, or the subjects that they want to learn. And I think this generation, what I love about Generation Z, is that they're more vocal about what they want. In my generation, you were very quiet. You were passive. You sat there and you were given the information, because kids didn't, they were seen and not heard. Yeah, you didn't question authority. Authority was there, and that was it. But this generation kind of demand to be accepted, and they don't accept not being accepted. And they also demand, I want to have some, autonomy over what I do and what I learn and how I learn it. Which is great.
Sure. So, but the pace of change in Ireland is very slow.
It is.
And I worry that we won't pivot fast enough to do a service to the children coming up, who will be hurtled into this world. And in actual fact, they're competing on a far broader stage as they go forward now. It's not about going up against your fellow Irish people for work, etc. It's a global world now.
Absolutely, it is. And that's, I suppose, it brings me back to the worry about, are we preparing our kids for the world that's out there now? Are we teaching them in a way that, gives them a head start in the world and gives them, an ability to be successful and to achieve and to attain in the world that's out there now? I would question that. And I suppose that requires some new blood going into the department with new ways of looking at education and taking all the research that's out there. But it's constantly changing. I mean, everything changes, society and, how we look at education, how we look at ourselves, all that is a constant. It's not a concrete thing, it's constantly fluid. So there'll always be new theories, so you need to have your finger on the pulse with what's coming through.
I really believe that there's a space there for connecting, and the change will come from the ground up as opposed to looking to central government for it to come. And
True.
that's where the push has to come from.
But I think a lot of teachers are doing, are teaching it in an innovative way. I see it in my work, and I do see it, and
So
I'm very hopeful.
have that
We'll get there, but it might be in the next generation, I think, of educators.
right. So have you ever heard of the Waldorf Schools?
The Waldorf School, no.
It's one where those in Silicon Valley send their children to the Waldorf Schools. Technology, they're not exposed to technology until after the age of 12.
I think it's interesting.
It's a very interesting twist. What do they know that the rest of us are not meant to know? And that the brain is wired in a traditional sense. And I recall some research findings which showed that those who had the traditional approach initially, and the reading, the writing, the learning, the memorization, recall, etc., and then were later exposed to technology, caught up and passed out. Those who have been exposed at an earlier stage. So there's a little bit of wisdom there somewhere that we're missing, So you talk about parenting styles. What in your practice do you note is the pervasive parenting style at the minute?
Probably inconsistent parenting. To be honest, yeah, what I would see a lot of, and I think this impacts women probably more than men, is parenting from a position of guilt. I think women, especially in Ireland, give themselves an incredibly difficult, they speak to themselves really harshly. I think they're incredibly critical of their parenting because they probably, traditionally when they were growing up, let's say society was constructed a certain way that perhaps the mother stayed at home and the father went out and worked. And so they recall their own childhood, and that all bit of comparison is the thief of joy. And they think about their mother being there all the time, and they weren't probably sent to a creche. But the modern world has changed irrevocably. I mean, it's remarkably different than any time that we've ever had to parent before. I mean, both parents generally have to go out to meet the financial demands that's placed on us. A house, to buy a house now is an incredibly big expense. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the expense, especially, in Ireland, Dublin and these places. But so parents, I think, often because they're busy during the week, especially I think women at the weekend, they can feel that guilt. And when the child asks for something, they acquiesce and they give in because they come to the error and they're thinking that that's a good, they're overcompensating. And what they do then is they develop a sense of expectancy in the child, and the child becomes a little bit more difficult, and the child wants more and more and more and more. And to satiate that, they give more, and the more you give, the more they want. And so you're setting yourself up for a very uncomfortable teenage year with your child when they have an expectancy that the world will move around them and the world will shape them, and there's no consequences for their behavior and there's no ramifications for their bad behavior. I think you're launching off into the world then a very unhappy child and a very unhappy young adult who will find the relational life very difficult because they've never known how to compromise. And what I'd see clinically is often couples coming in before they get married, and it's almost like the woman's bringing the man in to reparent him because he's never had to be parented. He was never parented because his mother, and I hear the same stories all the time, Teresa. My mom gave me everything. I never had to do anything. And dad was just kind of like, passive, and mom
kept the reins.
Yeah, mom was kind of the one who gave me everything I wanted, and I never had to compromise, and I was always able to not do my homework if I didn't want to, or if I needed this, I got this. So they've never developed the skill. They've never developed the skill to rely on themselves. So they're not resilient, and they don't know how to compromise. And you see them in a relationship really struggling.
Is there a space there for making it attractive for young mothers to parent the children for those critical years and launch them out into the workplace, and then launch them out into school life, etc., and then return to work themselves? I know you've some young mothers are very ambitious, etc., for their own careers, but it's a fine balance that's not possible to really attain. serving both masters, serving that the demands of motherhood, serving the demands of a fast-paced workplace, and etc. But our government don't seem to make it easy.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I suppose I don't think it should rely on the mother to have to do that. I think our society should be more advanced, where we can think about the father being able to take time off at work. And I think there's that hidden bit of society that we think we're very equal, and we think there's great equity out there. We've moved massively, but I think the old paradigms are probably still running underneath everything. And that I think what I've noticed in the pandemic is it's illuminated the inequity that exists. And I think the pressures placed on women were really many over the last 40 months, caring for their elderly parents and minding the home and keeping everything going, doing their job, homeschooling. I mean, it just really illuminated all that. And I think it's about time that we really, as a society, addressed that. And I suppose if a mother wants to have a career, she should be able to have a career, and she shouldn't feel guilty about that. And that's the work I do. You shouldn't feel guilty for the work you do. Society is different. And if you want to have, I don't think it's ambitious to think, to want a career. I think that's just something that we should all have, yeah, exactly.
So it's shared parenting and getting the balance right with a little bit of help from.
And I think women really struggle with saying no. And I think women, and it comes out of, when I look at it, Teresa, it comes out of the old paradigm of being the good daughter, the good child, right? I think that's a really destructive paradigm. I'm the good daughter. I do all the good. I mean, that's a great way to get someone to be motivated and to do things for you. You're always the good daughter there, Teresa. You're a great daughter, and you go off and you do everything, right? But it puts incredible, pressure. So
they're even there. I often think they have a harder time than previous generations in the multitasking.
Oh my God, incredible pressure on women. I think there's incredible pressure on women at the moment, and I think on men as well. I think as men, I suppose, don't understand what their position is anymore. I suppose that's kind of not a concrete thing either. So they're trying to, maybe on quicksand, trying to figure out where the hell do they stand.
I think they're adjusting to the.
I think they're adjusting.
Power of woman coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think society has changed, and I think, it's changing. I don't think it's there yet, but I think it's changing. And I suppose in all that change, you're going to get people trying to cling on to the status quo and the old ways of being.
You use a phrase repeatedly in your book, be by your child's side, not on it. I think it catches it all, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely.
It's very good. So, really a broad question. Is technology, when inappropriately used, a vehicle to the rapid destruction of men on many levels, emotionally, socially, morally, intellectually? It's a broad one. What do you think?
Are you using man as human?
The generic, mankind.
Mankind, right?
It's changing on all levels, emotionally, socially, morally, intellectually, everything, because of our use of technology and our unbridled use of it.
Well, I think when you use anything in an unbridled way, it has the potential to be destructive, right, and corrosive. But technology is particularly insidious if you don't manage it, because it's designed in a certain way to bring you into it, and you become immersed in it. And I think particularly with children, and I've heard this story so many times over the course of my research for my book and in my practice, mothers coming in and saying, I'm really angry with my husband because he got the kids into it. Now I've lost my family and the kids are gone. They don't go out with their friends, and they're just sullen, and they're just on the game.
Into something else.
Yeah, but no child wants to be on their game 10 hours. They'll say they do, but no child really wants to be on their game 15, 16 hours a day. You ask any child, how do you feel after being on your game for 10 hours? They'll tell you they feel terrible. They feel absolutely awful, right? So, but then it's just too powerful for them to manage. I do think it's very destructive, and I do think it can have deleterious impact on your child's and on an adult's well-being. And I think we have to manage it. We have to have boundaries around it, and we have to manage ourselves and our interaction with it, or it will impact on us, because the research is showing it's addictive. It's addictive, and it disrupts many parts of our lives. And I think it can become to disrupt every facet of our life if we're not careful with it.
I noticed in your book you talked about I see it feelingly.
Yeah.
You're speaking to Gloucester.
Yeah.
Now, are young actually seeing the world in a more feeling way? Or is the use of social media causing a confusion between feeling and wide-ranging emotions, and it's been externalized as anxiety? You talk about steps for parents to manage and handle the anxiety of their youth.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think first of all, parents must give themselves an incredible clap on the back that their children can see the world in a feeling way. You know, when I was hearing all this talk about millennials and snowflakes, and I was watching that, and I was going, that's an incredibly pejorative, labels to be throwing out at these kids. And I was as I was listening to, and I wrote about it a lot in my column for the Examiner. I was saying, when we label our kids like this, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because we're the ones who created these kids. Didn't these snowflakes? These snowflakes
Absolutely.
didn't happen in a polar vortex. It wasn't something that was just a
Didn't happen
vacuum
out
of
of midair. Yeah.
yeah. We raised them to be able to speak their minds, so we parented them in a way that allowed them to talk about their feelings, which is a great thing, right? So again, I think our children are seeing the world in a more feeling way, but I think that I suppose we always maybe saw it in a feeling way, but we didn't really express it so much because we didn't think it would be validated. Where I see it kind of maybe going over to the extreme, maybe, is that we're over validating everything. And then all of a sudden, in our society, let's say, we have an incredible awareness of mental health. And yet you could say there's an epidemic, as you said, of anxiety. There's an epidemic out there, of anxiety. I mean, kids are presenting to, I'd see incredible amounts of anxiety. Why is that? And I'd say, well, they're not as resilient. I don't think as resilient as they used to be, because I think parents have an error in their thinking, and they believe to help their child with the issue is to be a good parent. And, sometimes the majority of the time, standing back and allowing your child to manage the issue for themselves is
Yeah.
the real
And to
gift of your
feel the
parenting.
failure, to feel
Yeah,
the
to
failure
feel
once
the
again.
failure and help them manage the failure, and
Sure.
and I would say a real key skill is to reframe it from failure to something else.
Sure.
We all fall short at times. None of us get everything we want. We have to be able to manage that. And so if we feel that in an incredibly, deep way, it's not going to be productive for us going forward as an adult, because, yourself, Teresa, you don't get everything you go for. You don't get every promotion. You don't get everything. You're not successful in everything you go for. So you have to develop a skill very early on in your life of managing things, and the difference between a child who's resilient, and this is the
It's
debunking the resilient myth. One child isn't born with resilience, and one child isn't born with an absence of resilience. It's just one child is taught how to be resilient, and one child is taught not to be
we
resilient.
model it. We
We
model
model
it.
it for our kids.
Yeah. So, while some parents may be guilty of using the game as a parenting tool in many
Yeah.
ways, and giving in to the child, they are unwittingly allowing them exposure to extreme violence and all sorts of pornography, etc.,
Mm.
which really steals something at an early age, which, would you agree, is not, you can't retrieve it really once it's
Yeah, no, I do, and especially, I suppose, I'm an advocate again. I'm an advocate. I'm a teenage advocate, child and teenager advocate, and pornography is something that I talk a lot about, because I can see how destructive it is, and violence is very destructive for a child's mind. Not everybody who views violence and pornography, it's important to say, will become, interested in violence and say violence and sexual violence against women. That's just the reality. Not everyone's going to be like that. But if there's a seed of vulnerability in there, if there's something in there in the child, and they view something really destructive, it can really start the genesis of this very pathological road that they go on. And so I think it's really important that we manage this with our children. And there are ways to limit what they can access on their phone. There are ways. We're not powerless. I suppose the biggest mistake we can make as parents, because we're immigrants and digital immigrants, we can say, well, I don't understand the game. I don't understand the phones. They'll be
That's where
fine.
the conundrum lies.
Yeah.
This is where the parents nearly attach a sort of a sophistication to their children's know-how with it,
Exactly.
and they fall into that pit of letting them off at it.
Exactly. And that's a very dangerous, it's like letting your child off into the city on their own and saying, go off there now and have a good time for yourself there at 6.
Yeah,
And,
I know.
and it's worse than that, because,
The
you're
consequences.
letting them off into the globe,
Yeah. So where does the responsibility lie for heightening the awareness among parents and educators as to the downside of technology? Where does it, is there a need for an overarching umbrella, a type of governance ruling about it? Or how is it going to be got to, unless by people from like you or like myself on the ground trying to heighten awareness? But that's not enough.
Well, we can't expect the government to parent our children, right?
No.
We
No.
can't expect the government to parent our children. We can't expect the school to parent our child. We have to parent our own children. We've brought them into the world. We've made a decision to bring children into the world, and so we have a responsibility to, you know, to mind and to give, nurture them, and to give them the guidance they need as they go through this sinuous journey through life. But also the government has a responsibility, I think, around things like pornography. They have a responsibility to make it more difficult for our children to be able to access it. When I was a kid, if I went into a shop, in my local shop in Cork, I'd have to walk down to the village and ask the shopkeeper for a pornographic magazine. You'd never dream of ever doing that, because he'd be like, "Hello, Richard, how are you?" He'd know your family, and, you know, you'd never do
That
anything
was
like
the
that.
control in ways, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But also it was 18s to get that, so you'd have to be 18 to get it. But now you can be 6 or 7 or 8, and there's no one watching you. So we have to, as a society, say to our government here, look, there needs to be a policy here. We need to make these people who, these, you know, these platforms that design these things, they're not going to make our children, you know, put their email in. They want the money, they want the advertising, they want to have as many more clicks they get, the better, because that's more advertising for them. So they're not going to do it. So we need to bring it in, and we need to policy this thing. But we also, as parents, that's one area of it for our government and for our schools. The schools have to have policies around accessing pornographic material and when the phones can be accessed and all the rest of it. Schools need to have that as well. But as parents, we need to teach our children. This is the crucial of it, the real crux of it. We need to teach our kids to make the right decisions when we're not around. How do we do that? By how we parent them, right? And
from the outset.
From the outset.
What would you consider as enforceable rules in relation to safe and appropriate use? Age limitations?
Yeah, in relation to the government, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think,
What's
yeah. I think enforceable is, you know, watching the age that children access pornography. I think what's enforceable, I think that's probably the main, as I see it, that would be probably the main issue for kids, because, you know, accessing games, again, you know, a certain game like Call of Duty might be 18s, whatever, and the big shoot 'em up games, they should have to prove their, you know, age verification should be there. You know, you go down to the,
But we often hear of dads going out buying them and bringing them home.
Oh, you do, and I said that's, you know, and moms would say to me, "This, I'm really annoyed at my husband because he brought the game in." But we have to watch what they're doing. We can't expect the government to policy and to parent our children. We have to watch the game. We have to look at the game and say, "What are you doing? Call of Duty? That's 18s. You're 10. You can't play that game."
Who actually bears the responsibility to start the campaign of awareness? How is it going to start? Will we have to wait for it to sort of start organically after a massive tragedy of some kind? Even the case in Lucan that you talked about, by boy A and boy B, while it is horrific, it's nearly as though we as a society, it's 2 days wonder. There was an old saying, well, that's 9 days wonder. That's gone. It's 2 days wonder, and we move on because everything is so fast paced. So where will the campaign of awareness start?
Well, I do think it starts with parents. I think it comes with parents meeting up and talking to each other, talking about what's going on with their son. You know, if I was a parent now of a, say, a teenage child, I'd know all the parents in the class, and I'd be talking to them about what's your son doing and what are they accessing and what controls do you have. But also, I think it really comes to the schools. I do an awful lot of talking. I think people like myself who go out there talking about it, who experience, you know, as you said at the start there, I experienced this through so many different ways in my work, through schools, through universities, through my clinic, through my column. You know, I see it an incredible amount. And I think, you know, there's an onus on any of us who are working, I think, you know, in the, say, clinically speaking as psychotherapists, to get out there and say, what are we seeing here as a family therapist? What's impacting families? I think we need to get out there.
Do you speak to groups of parents now?
I do indeed, yeah.
And what's the
And I go to schools as well.
I found it very difficult to get parents in on these nights where I had maybe even Gardaí in talking about internet safety and all the rest. Do you find your talks are well attended? Is there an awareness beginning on the ground?
Yeah, you're right. I've gone around the country talking to schools about it, and I suppose sometimes the talks will be very well attended, and then sometimes they'll be averagely attended.
Sure.
You know, but and it really, I suppose, and I remember at one talk I gave, and there was probably about 15 people at it, and the principal was saying to me, it's such a shame because there's so much issues with this in the school. But one parent stood up and said, I've lost my family. Remember, I just never forget, that's in the book, I think. I lost my children. Wow. Can you help me with this?
But it strikes me as we speak, when it comes from someone from your age group or even younger, maybe that's when you'll catch the young parent. I remember standing up at an open evening and I was in full flight on this whole thing. We had done a project for the young scientists, and I was giving the results, the findings. Would you prefer to sit with mom and dad to watch a movie as part of the family, or would you prefer to be in your own room gaming, etc.? And a few of my SNAs the next morning cracked up laughing at me. They said, Teresa, you were in full launch, but the younger parents were all on their phones.
There's
So
an irony there.
there is an irony there. Yeah, absolutely. Richard, thank you so much.
Lovely to talk to you.
Enlightening conversation. I wish you the best with parenting the Screenager. It's a must read for every parent.
Thank you very much. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much.